Ladies, put down the hymn. Would you pray? Spirit, open our minds and our hearts to hear what you have to say. We seek to do things your way. Guide us, I pray. In your name I ask. Amen. Each year I'm given a week for sermon research, and usually I take about half the time in the spring and half the time in the fall, and usually go to my cabin and think and pray about what to preach on. Last fall, as I was mapping out my sermon topics, I saw this little interlude between Easter and Mother's Day. And I thought, well, that's a good time to maybe talk about marriage. Friends, I've come a long way in my view about marriage. I used to believe that marriage was only between a man and a woman. I'm not as firm in my belief as I once was. When I was in seminary, one of our professors encouraged us always to read those people you disagree with. Learn about what they're thinking and why are they thinking that way. I believe the issue boils down to how we interpret about 6 passages in the Bible. You know, I'm also going to let God be God and not judge people. I'm not God and I don't want to pretend to be. I hope you are the same way. What I also believe is that 2 people, no matter who they are, there will be differences between those 2 people. There are biological, emotional, psychological differences. There are those social pressures. And the difference between how people view man or a woman. The reason there's so many jokes about marriage is that once a man and a woman begin living together, those differences dramatically surface. A part of marriage is when you agree to spend the rest of your life sleeping in a room that's too warm beside someone sleeping in a room that's too cold. Some people say that marriages are made in heaven. Well, my reply is so is lightning and thunder. 2 separate people from different backgrounds, different families, different histories, cannot come together without those differences being raised in their relationship. I don't have a clue on how women think. I've gotten a little better at it over the years, at least with my wife. My wife Ruth does think and relate differently than do I. That's neither good nor bad, neither right nor wrong. It just is. God made us different. And that certainly has some implications for marriage. I'll be honest with you, in my years of ministry and doing premarital counseling, when we begin to discuss the ceremony itself, I usually let the couple pick the scriptures that they would like read at their wedding. And when asked, I will share some scriptures on love and relationship. And sometimes I will share Ephesians chapter 5. I don't recall a time when a bride-to-be wanted Ephesians 5 read at their wedding. I still wonder why. No, I'm just kidding about that. But the reality is, to a great number of people today, this passage that Eric read seems old-fashioned. It looks like a section of the Bible that was designed for some ancient culture. Not for 2019. Come on, we've evolved, haven't we? I suspect it would come as a great surprise to most of us here this morning to hear the fact that the people in Ephesus probably reached the same conclusion as you and I do at times about this passage. The Ephesians, they were not steeped in that patriarchal society of the Hebrews. Ephesus was a coastal city. It was a large city in western Turkey, across the Aegean Sea from Greece. Their claim to fame was that they were the home to the temple of the goddess Artemis, who was also called Diana by the Romans. The Ephesians were totally absorbed in that culture, so feminism was strong in that culture. That's why we read in the book of Acts that Priscilla was so well accepted as a Christian leader and teacher in those Gentile areas where feminism was strong. And the Apostle Paul clearly has no problem with Priscilla as a strong woman and leader, or he would not have taken her and her husband Aquila along with him. So even as Paul had left Priscilla in Ephesus as a leader of the church, in his letter, Paul makes some truths that can be helpful for marriage. Paul writes, wives are to submit to their husbands, and husbands are to love their wives just as Christ loved the church. Strong words. Words that perhaps we should not dismiss as old-fashioned or out of date, or that was meant for an ancient culture. Those words were pointed directly at people who felt that they were old-fashioned and out of date. Now, when we look at the world around us, the obvious truth is there are a whole lot of men who would take advantage of such a submissive person. Why do you think it's so important that a Christian marry another Christian? Why do you think it's so critically important that a woman not rush into marriage or settle for somebody just because they're a great provider or she's a single mother who needs help with children? Ladies, if you're going to be this kind of a woman that the Bible encourages, then you better be extremely sure about the character of the person you're going to marry. If he's not a person that you can have such confidence in, that you can be submissive, then he's not marriage material. God has someone better for you. Over and over again, I've been amazed, and not only in my own life, but how people are willing to settle for so much less than God wants for us. Well, that brings me to that piece of controversy that upsets a lot of people. So many of us focus a large amount of our time, our energy, and our anger on those verses of 22 through 24. Wives, submitted. And we most of the time overlook the 9 verses that follow it. My friend, you cannot truly understand verses 22 through 24 until you realize that the Bible takes 3 times as much to talk about the husband's responsibility. Why should a wife ever allow herself to be submissive? Because if the wife's husband lives up to those 9 other verses, that wife will never have to worry about how she's going to be treated. The first thing we see, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. That's the first thing we're told, that the husband must be willing to give his life for his wife. How did Jesus demonstrate his love for us? He allowed himself to be crucified for us. He could have prevented it if he was only interested in himself. But his love for us was so deep that Jesus died on that cross for us. That's the kind of love the husband is commanded to offer to his wife. And also, did you hear? Husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. Does that sound a little strange? Paul's referring back to Genesis chapter 2, verse 24, which says that when we get married, in a very real sense, we are no longer two separate people. We're to become one flesh, one body. We cannot do something that is harmful to our spouse without doing something harmful to ourselves, because we are one flesh. When you become angry and you're about to make that cutting remark, picture those words slicing into yourself, not just your spouse. Does that sound a little far-fetched? Mystical? Psychologists will tell you that every time a man hurts a woman in some way, he also lowers his own self-esteem. In numerous studies, modern scientists have confirmed what this passage in the Bible told us when it was written 2,000 plus years ago. Psychologists Cliff Notorious and Howard Markman studied newlyweds over a period of 10 years. They were looking for indicators that would help counselors predict whether a marriage would last or not. You might be surprised at the one thing they found to be an indicator of a marriage's success. As they tracked the things that the couple said about each other, they discovered that if 10 or more of every 100 comments, 10% or more of them were made about the other was a put down, the marriage would fail. If 5 or fewer of those 100 comments, less than 5%, were a put down, the marriage would succeed, at least last. If there were 5 to 10, it could go either way. My friend, how do you talk to your partner? Over and over and over again, the Bible tells us about the power of the tongue. We all are to watch what we say. Little nitpicking comments are like a cancer in a marriage that can slowly die out that commitment and that love in the relationship. Most of you probably know I like to tease every now and then, and some of you do too. But we all know that there can be a fine line between light teasing comments and comments that cut. Make sure we give that line a wide berth by what we say to each other. Interesting, a separate study done by all places, Psychological Today magazine, obviously not a Christian magazine, indicated that one of the best indicators of a healthy marriage was whether the couple prayed together or not. I think that's what Paul's talking about. Paul's also reminded us that when God created marriage, God saw it as a break from the past. We are leaving our past families and focusing on our future family. Now, are we supposed to still honor our parents? Of course we are. But of all the old mother-in-law jokes come about because we don't always do as good as we should, when recognizing that when we are married, we are leaving our parents and becoming one flesh with that person. The main theme, repeated over and over again in those 9 verses, is how husbands are to act toward their spouse the same way that Christ acted toward the church. Christ loved us. Christ taught us. Christ prayed for us and over us. Christ forgave us. Christ gave himself for us. That's why a Christian marriage should be stronger than a marriage of non-believers. Strong Christian marriages are made of two people who not only are willing to look deeply into each other's personhood, but they are willing to look deeply in the same direction. Two people focused on the direction that God has laid out for their lives and for their ministries. You know, as I sat there a few months back and planned this sermon, I remember wondering how many of you I would see putting your elbow in your partner's ribs when I said a thing that you would like me to say. You know, friends, troubled marriages begin to mend. And communication is reestablished when at least one of those couple is willing to make a breakthrough and change old patterns of relationship by saying, Lord, begin this in me. See, God hasn't given you the power or the responsibility to change your spouse. He's given you the responsibility to change yourself. And when you pray that prayer, Lord, begin it in me. Let me be more loving. Let me love more wisely. You live that way, your spouse is going to feel loved, respected, and cared for. And you will have an intimate marriage, no matter who you marry, and no matter the differences between you. Food for thought.